I think a case can certainly be made that it's not a linguistic thing. It's they have a priori commitment to something they want Jesus to be, which is not fully God, and
Mm.
therefore they're going to do whatever they need to do to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that seems to be the case. Yeah.
Sometimes I feel the weight of the world fall down on me so heavy, and I need a friendly voice with some good theology. Calvinistically speaking, so I mix a manly drink, Pepsi and shoe polish, and I hit the YouTube link. Don't say hit, that sounds violent. And I feel my troubles all melt away. Oh, oh, it's your Calvinist podcast with Keith Foskey. Beards and bow ties, laughs till sunrise. It's your Calvinist podcast with Keith Foskey. He's not like most Calvinists, he's nice.
Your Calvinist podcast is filmed before a live studio audience. And welcome back to Your Calvinist podcast. My name is Keith Foskey, and I am your Calvinist. I want to thank you for being a part of the show today. We're going to be talking with my guest about the New World Translation. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's the Bible that was translated by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, otherwise known as the Jehovah's Witnesses. We're going to be talking about how they handle certain texts and why we believe that translation is not a good translation of the Bible. But before we do that, I wanted to remind you that this podcast is a ministry of Sovereign Grace Family Church. If you're in the Jacksonville area, come visit us, and you can learn more about us at sgfcjax.org. Also, we are sponsored by tinybibles.com. If you're interested in getting the smallest Bible on the market, it is able to be hidden anywhere, taken anywhere, passed down as an heirloom, or given away as a friend. And also, they now have a tiny Gospel of John. And the great thing about the tiny Gospel of John is you can read it without any type of eye assistance or eyepiece. But both of those are available at tinybibles.com. And if you use my first name, Keith, as a coupon code, you'll get a good percentage off. Finally, before we get to the show, I want to also remind you about our new show, Friday Night Live. Every Friday night, I'm going live and I'm answering questions that you're sending in through email or directly from the YouTube channel as people are sending in their comments while I do the show. If you want to send me an email for me to respond to, you can send it in through the website at keithfoskey.com. All right, now I'm going to bring my friend in. He's an expert in biblical languages, and we're going to be talking about the New World Translation. Here we go.
Well, again, guys, I want to thank you all for being with me today as I welcome a guest to the show, Darryl Burling, who is the founder of Biblical Mastery Academy, previously known as Master the New Testament Greek. This institute offers online seminary level education, primarily focusing on teaching biblical Greek and Hebrew. His mission with the institute is to equip Christians to read and understand the Bible in its original languages, aiming to deepen their theological study and personal engagement with the scriptures. So, Darryl, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Keith. It's a joy and a blessing.
And now I can tell, talking to you right away, that you're automatically smarter than me because you have that great accent. But can you tell us where your accent is from?
I live in New Zealand. I was born and raised here, and I would say that it's probably the least educated accent on the planet. Certainly, the more time I spend here, the compared to the States, particularly where I did my education. Certainly, I would say that I feel much more educated, overeducated here compared to in the States. But no, I think I'm from New Zealand. It's a joy to live here, really. It is challenging from a Christian point of view. It's a challenging country to live in a lot of ways, but it's a beautiful country. There's lots of freedom. I live in a small town. We have wonderful mountain biking trails, so there's very little to complain about.
Amen. So you are a biblical language teacher, but I'm sure that's not how you began. I'd like to hear first simply how you became a Christian, and then talk about how you got into teaching the Bible. So were you brought up by Christian parents, or were you engaged by some friends? How did you come to know the Lord?
Yeah, so no, I was not born in a Christian home at all. To this day, unfortunately, my parents are still not believers.
Mhm.
But I had a friend whose family did come to Christ in high school, and his parents were going to check out a Bible college, so they went away for a week or so. And while they were away, I stayed with my friend in his home, and next to the bed that I was sleeping in, there was a NIV Bible. And years before, I'd started reading from the beginning of Genesis and got as far as about Exodus 30-ish and gave up, as an 8-year-old boy would. And so this time I picked it up and I started reading from the Gospel of Matthew, and was, certainly as I got into the Sermon on the Mount, was arrested by the authority of Christ, and, the power he wielded. And at the end of that week, an evangelist came through town. My friend invited me to church, and yeah, that guy preached the word, preached it faithfully, and at the end of the evening, the evening service, I went to the morning and the evening service, first time ever in church, really, by my own volition. And yeah, at the end of that evening, he asked me, my friend introduced me to the preacher, and he asked me if I wanted to become a Christian. I said yes, and he helped me to, give my life to the Lord there. So that's kind of how I became a Christian. I was working at that stage in a meat processing plant, just as a 17-year-old, just left school kind of thing. And yeah, it was a dead job for me. It really wasn't an enjoyable job. But as time went on, I moved from there into information technology. I went and did a number of different jobs for different companies, eventually worked for Microsoft. It got to a point where I was just kind of like, I don't know this is not what I want to keep doing. And at that point, there was, I seriously considered, going off to seminary. At this point, I was in my mid-30s-ish, and, eventually, when I was about 38, eventually we ended up uprooting my family, selling our home, and using that money to travel to the States. Spent 4 years living in California, where I trained at the Master's Seminary. I did in the Master's University as well, and then I ended up doing a PhD at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, graduating well into my 40s, but better off for it by a long shot. And one of those things I kind of wish I'd done a little earlier, but the Lord has His plans, and I'm very thankful to just just to enjoy and cherish all that He does for me. So.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, and a wonderful training that you were able to receive, getting to go train at Masters and train at Southern. Well, you were there, I guess, when Al Mohler was there.
Yeah, he's
So,
still there, I believe. Yeah, yeah,
oh
yeah,
yeah, that's what I meant.
yeah, yeah.
I think he came in the '90s, so he's been there ever
Yeah,
since. Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah.
was
So that
saved in 1990, so I think he started there as the president about the same time I was saved. So, yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Mm.
So, in regard to your biblical language training, what made you decide this? Not only is this where I want to focus, but this is what I want to teach. This is what I want to make my life's ministry,
Mm.
and give to other people. What is it about the languages that inspired you?
Yeah, so when I was going through my master's degree, I did in my undergraduate degree, we did went through Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek and learnt the basics. And then once we got into seminary, I did 2 classes on Greek exegesis. It was a pretty Greek intensive MDiv, certainly compared to a lot of MDivs, but yeah, Greek intensive. So I did 2 semesters of Greek exegesis. I did 1, 2, 3, 4 additional electives on Greek. And I just what I wanted to do is, before I started seminary, I kind of thought, well, I could probably learn some Greek, and before, I had no idea what I was doing. So I got Mounce's second edition and picked it up, opened it up, and I got through, I think, about the alphabet. I think that was about as far as I got, writing out the alphabet repeatedly. And when I got to my undergraduate degree, and I had to actually figure out how to actually complete this to get the grades, that was really where I had to figure out, okay, how am I actually going to do this? How do you actually learn a language? Because, like, someone asked me the other day, when did you find out that you were gifted with languages? And my answer was, I'm not gifted with languages. I have just worked really hard to understand the Greek language in particular, and the work that I've put in has really benefited me and paid off. So that's really the focus that I've had. And so when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I came up with some systems that really helped me to internalize everything I was learning, and then to be able to reproduce that consistently for exams. And I graduated with, really solid grades, went on to my master's degree, and then sort of continued to work on that basis. Okay, what systems do I need to develop for myself so that I can actually master this language? And so that was really what it was really. So when I was going through my master's degree, one of the challenges we had was vocabulary. And I knew, because when I started learning, before I even started seminary, my goal was to be able to read the New Testament in Greek. So as I went through my exegesis classes, I realized that they actually weren't going to provide us with that level of knowledge. And so I worked out, well, how am I going to achieve this goal? And so for me, it was really, well, okay, so I need to start learning the vocabulary. I can't do it by occurrence. We did that in our classes. It was horrible. All the words were without context. Makes it much more difficult to learn to read. It's not terrible. Once you get down to 20 occurrences and below, it gets much less valuable. I went lower than that. So anyway, but I ended up saying, okay, well, let's just learn the words for one book and then we'll go on to another book. And at that point, I had thought about it from the point of view of, well, I'll just do whatever books I'm doing for seminary. But eventually what I did is I realized that actually the best way to do this is start with the easiest books and move to the hardest books. And so I created my own vocabulary set to do that. And eventually, when I was doing my doctorate, I was like, well, I could actually probably make some money off this and help support my doctoral work, because I wasn't earning any money, even though I was back here in New Zealand. At that point, we were broke. We had no money. We'd spent it all on our master's degree and whatnot. And traveling, really living expenses in the States was what really sucked it all up. But the point is that we started with money. We had no money. I needed to earn some money, and I didn't have time to go and get a full-time job. So I was like, well, let's try and bundle this up and sell it. And so that started off Master New Testament Greek. And then eventually I came across a system for how to turn that into a membership, and Master New Testament Greek as a membership was born in our Biblical Mastery Academy. So it's just grown a little bit, well, quite a lot really from there. So yeah, so it's really about developing the systems I needed as somebody who's not gifted with the languages to be able to master the language.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's all interesting, especially how it kind of was almost birthed out of necessity. Here's a way that I can use this to benefit. And were you or are you serving in ministry as well in a church, or is this your primary ministry?
This is my vocation. This is my primary ministry. So I'm an elder / pastor, and I would say elder more than pastor perhaps, but I serve in a local church here as well, preaching a handful of times a year. I do a bit of preaching in other churches, a few conferences here and there. But no, this is my main job for sure. Yeah. So, and I see this as an investment in the local church. I mean, how can it be bad for the church to have, even if it's not pastors, people in the pulpits who are following along the pastor with the Greek New Testaments, understanding it, knowing it, and even challenging the pastor on his poor use of Greek, which sometimes unfortunately does happen, right? So it's good to, and my thinking is, even if I don't, because we don't have as many pastors in our program as I'd like us to have, we have a lot more lay people in our church, in our program rather. And I think the benefit of that is that it should be pushing from the bottom up to require more of pastors and to set higher expectations for them. Because honestly, the number of pastors who have zero knowledge of Greek is shockingly high. Not that I'm saying necessarily every pastor should learn Greek, but certainly I think if you're a pastor, you should be educated, and part of your education should be the languages. And so I think there's, it used to be one time in England at least that the educated class were all clergy. Well, not all perhaps, but clergy was a large part of the educated class, is probably a better way of putting it. But those days are well and truly over now. And, now we suffer really from ignorance, I think, if anything, in the local church. And so if we can sort of shore that up, and we do that in a number of ways, not only by teaching people the language, but we also have a pretty heavy focus on church history, particularly the early church, the Septuagint, We talk a lot about that. We talk about the Old Testament. We also talk about Bible culture and backgrounds, all these kinds of things. And the point of all of this is just to raise the base level of knowledge. We don't really focus on theology. We talk about exegesis, how exegesis leads into theology, but we don't push a particular theological system. We really want people to sort of be in the scriptures and let the scriptures do the work of transforming people's minds and hearts. So, yeah.
That's great. Now I have to know, I have to ask this because I'm so curious, and I told you I think it was off camera. My level of Greek is certainly not where I'd like it to be. But how long did it take you to go from basic understanding of Greek to being able to read the New Testament? Because you said that was your goal, and you set that goal. How long did it take you to achieve that goal to be able to read the New Testament directly from the original language?
Yeah, so I think when I started my learning Greek in my undergraduate degree, I think it was about from that point. So bear in mind that I then had 3 years of seminary, and then I went on and finished built the system and basically then used the system, adapted and used it. So for me, really, I think it was the bulk of the work was done in about 3 years, but I'd already had 3 years of Greek prior to that, where I'd done a sort of a base level, if you like, and I probably learned maybe 1,000 words in those first 3 years of vocabulary, and then I learned the other 4,000 or so following on from that in 3 to 4 years, somewhere around there. So that's my experience. I've had people do it in 2 years, like learn the vocabulary and read through the New Testament. I've had other people, take much, much longer. So there's no right or wrong amount of time. And I think the challenge with thinking about it from a time point of view too is you kind of think of it as a all or nothing. But what we need to remember is that while I was doing that, I was still reading the New Testament in Greek. I just wasn't reading all of the New Testament in Greek, right? So there were words that I hadn't learned in Luke or in Acts, but I was able to read Matthew, Mark, John, and a whole bunch of other things 2 years, 2 years after I finished my MDiv kind of thing. Or even while I was doing my MDiv, there was like 5 or 6 books that I had learned all the vocabulary for there, so I could learn and read those books pretty consistently without too much trouble as well. So it's kind of like this, it's a building thing, if you like. So the problem is that we sort of think of reading the New Testament as a whole, and really what we're doing is we're kind of going like this, and just the circles get bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's more of the New Testament, if you like, that we actually can read. And so the joy just increases in that sense as you go, because you've got this basic stuff. You know how to read, say, like if you finish our first milestone, it's 7 books of the New Testament. If you finish that, well, you're in a good place to just keep going. 7 books, that's pretty good to be able to read 7 epistles and in Greek without looking words up, right? So that's a good foundation. So that's kind of how we structure it, and that's how long it took me as well. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great, and I mean, I'm very intrigued, very interested. It's good stuff, and I do want to change our attention in just a moment over to the question at hand, which is, I know a lot of people are going to click on this video because the thumbnail is going to mention that we're going to be talking about the New World Translation, which is a bad translation from the Greek, and we're going to talk about why that is. But I do have one other quick question, and this is about your program, and that is, you said there's 1,000 words, and then there's 5,000 words. The vocabulary is huge. You have to learn. Does your program use things like, do you have like a flashcard program? I'm just curious how it works. Like, is it a flashcard based program? Is it like I think a Rosetta Stone type thing where Rosetta Stone?
Yeah. So that's a great question. We started initially. I just started by my goal initially for the program was to help people who had been through seminary, who learned Greek, but who wanted to develop their Greek further. So when we started, I developed these. I took that vocabulary and I turned them into milestones, and basically basically made a whole series of lessons. For each lesson, you get 30 new vocabulary words to learn. You get a video, you get a reading from the New Testament that you can actually read because you've learned the vocabulary for it. and then you would get like a little video lesson, 5 to 10 minutes was my goal, explaining something of the grammar of that text. Not like you're not going to get the same explanation. The goal was to sort of go through a different element of grammar in every lesson. And we broke this up in the number of words and the amount of text there is in the New Testament. It worked out to about 7 milestones. Each milestone's got between 25 and 30-ish on average weeks worth of lessons in it. And so you just sort of work your way through. Each week you learn more vocabulary, you read more scripture, and that's kind of the way it's structured. As people started to join, we had people saying, well, my Greek is a bit rusty. Could you help me out with that? And I had other people saying, oh, do you teach Greek? Because I actually don't know the basics and I want to do this because this is doable. And so we ended up teaching beginning Greek. And I started with Mounts and taught through that for a few years. Found it to be really challenging for people who have jobs and responsibilities and whatnot. So we switched to beginning with New Testament Greek by Merkel and Plummer, which we used for a few more years, but we struck the same kind of problem. It was better, but we still broke every lesson into 2 lessons. But now what we do is we actually have our own beginning Greek course. I've finished writing my own beginning Greek grammar now. And we've got 60 lessons. So you do a lesson a week if you want to. Some of them are designed to be condensed together. So you can get through it in about a year with a job and whatnot. It's structured a little bit differently to most other grammars. We start with the aorist, not the present. We break it into much smaller chunks and sort of introduce you to things in a lot more, it's a lot easier to sort of get into the different elements. It's also based on verbal aspect, not tenses. We don't have deponency. So it's up to date with the latest scholarship and so on. So that's how we do it now. And so basically you go through beginning Greek. At the end of that, you'll be able to read 1 John, some of the Second Thessalonians. We have the vocabulary for some of the Second Thessalonians. And also we get you to read through a little portion of the Didache at the end of that beginning Greek course as well. And then you're into reading 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, 2 Thessalonians, Philemon, 1 Thessalonians, and Colossians. And we have a reading Greek course that follows on from that as well. So it's a mixture of self-study and some cohort-based courses that we offer you as well. So we use a third-party vocabulary app that works great. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it does work. And most of it's in our online community. So there's a community, you can ask questions, get help. There's badges you earn as you go through, all that kind of thing, just to keep you going. So that's but bma.to/get started as if you want a bit of an overview of what it looks like.
Nice. Okay, and I have to ask: is it when you're teaching the reading, are you overly concerned with pronunciation? Like, I know there's an argument between Erasmian pronunciation and the more modern way of pronouncing. What do you use? What do you prefer?
That's a great question. I started with Erasmian pronunciation, and a few months ago we decided to make the switch to modern pronunciation. So we now recommend that people use modern pronunciation, and at this date, I am still improving my pronunciation of modern because it's notoriously bad. But people want to come in and use Erasmian, that's okay. We don't want to judge them for that. But some people want to use reconstructed. That's very similar to modern, really. It's not much different. So we encourage that as well. We provide in our alphabet and pronunciation guide, we explain. In fact, there is a pronunciation guide you can get for free that we provide, which provides you with a pronunciation of each of the letter of the alphabet, the diphthongs, monophthongs, and so on. And if anyone wants that, bma.to/pronunciation, and that'll give you a difference between Erasmian and modern pronunciation, which makes it a little bit easier to sort of start making that change if you want to. But there's no pressure to inside our system.
Okay, so I want to have some fun real quick before we move on. So if I say John 1:1, and the only way I know how, which is Erasmian, it would be something like in arche ein halagos, kai halagos ein proston theon, kai theos ein halagos. Am I getting that about right?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. It's pretty good Erasmian pronunciation, yeah.
How would it sound in the modern or the reconstructed? Can you do it from memory?
I can have a crack at it. My pronunciation, like I said, is not as good as probably even your Erasmian pronunciation, but I would say something along the line of en arche, en logos, ki logos, en pros ton theon kithion in ologos.
Yeah, I noticed the chi is key. That's one
Key.
of the things that I pick up when I hear people giving a Greek sentence or reading a Greek sentence. I can always tell whether they're going with the Erasmus or the other, typically
Yeah.
by that right away. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, we don't pronounce breathing marks. So where you'd go
Okay.
ologos, we would just go ologos.
Okay.
The row is be just a regular R in Erasmian. It would be you'd use your tongue at a kind of sound. So
Hmm.
pros rather than pros. Yeah, so those are some initial distinctions. You've got some other ones like the way an upsilon or epsilon is more likely to be pronounced is used. So it sounds more like an E sound, unless, of
Hmm.
course, it's got certain letters after it, in which case it can come either a V or an F sound. So there's little things like that that sort of, and those are the ones, the upsilon or epsilon sounds are the ones that often will throw you off the most. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we could geek out for a while, and I feel like at this point I've just sort of taken you down a little rabbit hole to satisfy my own questions.
Yeah.
But I do want to take the audience into consideration because not
Good.
everybody's a
Good.
geek like me. So,
No, it's all good. It's all
um,
good.
so when it comes to the New World Translation, for those who don't know, the Jehovah Witnesses or Jehovah's Witnesses have their own translation of the Bible. So when they come to your door and they offer to talk to you about the Bible, they have a Bible that was translated by their own religious establishment, and it is intended to promote an understanding of who Jesus is based upon their reading of the Greek and translation into the English. And so what I want to talk to you about, Darryl, is primarily some of the texts that I know for certain there are going to be major disagreements on, specifically what we just talked about, John 1:1, and the use of the indefinite article there in the third clause.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there is in Colossians, and I think in a few other places, but I know specifically in Colossians because I preached through it last year, where they interject the word "other" when it speaks of Jesus creating all things. They
Mm,
would say, "Well, he created all other things," and there's
mm.
the interjection of that, which I think is more of a theological interjection than it is necessarily a linguistic imposition. But starting out, if someone came to your door, you the Greek scholar, and they don't know because you just look like a normal guy, handsome but still just normal. Yeah. If somebody came and said, Darryl, I want to tell you about this the Jehovah Witness religion, and I want to show you that your Bible says Jesus is God, but my Bible says Jesus is a God. What is it about the original language that helps you be confident that it should be translated and the word was God rather than the word was a God?
Yeah. So in terms of just dealing with the argument with reference to the Greek specifically, the assumption is that the use of the article in Greek and the use of the article in English is pretty, parallel. And that's just not the case. The Greek article does a fundamentally different task to the English article, which is one of the reasons why in English we have a definite and an indefinite article. The article, then, the use of the article in English definitizes or indefinitizes something. Now, in Greek, if you want to make something indefinite, you're not going to use an indefinite article to do it. You're going to use an indefinite pronoun or something like a marker of indefiniteness, like the an particle, or ian, kan, one of those crasis with an built into it. And those are the things that make something indefinite. If you wanted to say this is a God, then there are ways to make that really clear. Most of the time, though, bear in mind that even that idea of definiteness in Greek applies to a verb and not so much to a noun. So the use or non-use of an article is neither here nor there with reference to whether something should be translated in English with an article, a definite article or an indefinite article. you can have words in Greek that have no article that should be translated as definite, and you can have words in Greek that do not have the article that need the article in English. So there's just no connection. It's not to say that there's no relevance to the Greek article at all, but the purpose of the Greek article is primarily to point. And the idea of this pointing depends on the context and what it's doing in each context. So in this particular case, the word was God. What we have here is a predicate nominative. In a predicate nominative construction, the question is, which of these two nominatives, because remember, normally the nominative of, I shouldn't say remember, should I? But the nominative construction in Greek is normally going to be the nominative is going to be the subject of the verb, right? The subject of the verb is the person that the verb is focused on. Now, in an active verb form, which is kind of what you've got here in this third clause, I say kind of because it's really a stative verb, but nonetheless, it's active in form. The nominative is the subject that the verb is talking about, effectively. The verb is telling us the state of the subject. So in this case, we've got two nominatives, though, and the verb is in the middle between these two. Now, Greek in English, that wouldn't be a problem because you just say, well, we just follow the word order, right? Because that's how English works. Subject, verb, object. That's consistently how we structure things. The boy, the subject, hit, that's the verb. The ball, that's the object. But Greek doesn't care for word order at all. This is why it's what's called an inflected language, so that they can make the word order, change the word order up so that it suits their own purposes. And what they tend to do is they tend to front load ideas that they believe are more important within the sentence, and then things that are less important will trail off toward the end of the sentence, because it's really you're trying to make that impact with the beginning of the sentence. And so with this, because you don't need word order for this purpose, you have two nominatives, you don't have any inclination toward word order, and so you're left wondering, well, which of these two nominatives is the subject of the verb? And the article points. And in this case, with every predicate nominative, well, not every predicate nominative, but with most predicate nominatives, it actually points to the subject of the verb. And now you should be careful with that because there are rules around predicate nominatives and what the article does and how to determine which one of these two is the subject. But in this case, you've got two nouns. They are equivalent in many ways. There's no like pronoun there or anything like that. There's no proper name. It's just two nouns, so they're equal in that status. And so the question is, which one of these is a subject? And the answer is the one with the article is a subject. The role of the article there is to point to the subject of the verb. So the subject of the verb here is the word was God, right? So the lack of article doesn't make theos less definite. It's just allowing it to be left as the object of the verb. And so you have then the word order. So the lack of article has absolutely no bearing on the definiteness or indefiniteness of theos. In fact, in the same context, you've got NRK. The RK does not have the article on the beginning of it, and yet the New World Translation is happy to translate it in the beginning, right? Because it's obvious there is only one beginning. And obviously, within this context, from John's point of view, there is also only one God. There is no need for an article in Greek to make theos definite.
Yeah, exactly. And it is interesting too. I would have to look at the New World Translation. I'm not holding one in my hand right now, but does it, when they translate tos prontheon or prostantheon in the second clause, do they translate that the God, or do they say was with God?
With God, yeah.
So there is a case where they have the definite article, but they're not translating it.
Yeah, actually, let me just
Right?
check that. Yeah, I might be wrong on that because I haven't looked at this in their translation for a little bit. But let me just have a quick look online. You might have to edit this piece here.
No worries.
Yeah, they've changed their homepage. How inconvenient.
They don't want us. They don't want us to know. That's what it is. It's a big secret. It's they don't want Darryl coming for them. That's what.
There it is. I found it. All right, New World Translation. So I'll just find the passage. There it is, John chapter 1. Yeah. they translate this, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Yeah, so they don't put an article prior to theos in that second clause either.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting because you mentioned the in front of RK, that there's no article in front of RK, yet they put it there. There is
Mm,
an article in front of theos the first time it's used. They don't put it there, but they insist on the
mm.
necessity of the indefinite article in front of theos, or theos in the final clause.
Yeah,
So it just seems to
absolutely.
be it's. I think a case can certainly be made that it's not a linguistic thing. It's they have a priori commitment to something they want Jesus to be, which is not fully God, and
Mm.
therefore they're going to do whatever they need to do to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that seems to be the case. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, am I correct to say that you're going to be doing some work on the New World Translation, or am I misunderstanding that? I think
Not really.
you're.
No, it just seems to be that it's one of the subjects people want to talk about with me recently. So I've done a little bit of
Oh,
work on
okay.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know if you knew much about the history of it, as far as when and why it was translated and how long they've been using it. I didn't know if you, and you don't have to go look it
Yeah.
up. I just was curious
Yeah. No, so
if you knew that.
I don't know a huge amount about it, but when it was originally done, and I don't know when it was done either. I think it was the first half of the 20th century. I'm pretty confident of that. But when the New World Translation first did this translation, they were very quiet about who it was that was on the translation committee. They said that the translators wanted to remain anonymous because they were humble people giving glory to God. The problem with that, of course, is that, if you're truly humble, you're going to allow yourself to be open to criticism. You're going to allow yourself to be open for scrutiny. And particularly when you come up with something as important as a Bible translation. So I find that claim to be disingenuous to some extent. But anyway, when eventually somebody was converted from the Jehovah's Witness group to the Watchtower Society to Christianity, he wrote a book, and he did actually explain who the people were who translated the text. There were 5 translators. Of those 5 translators, 4 of them had no Greek or Hebrew training at all. So one of them did. The one who did, he claimed to know Hebrew and Greek, but when he was examined, he actually failed a simple Hebrew test. So he did some university, but he didn't study anything related to theology. And but nonetheless, he was the most educated person on that committee. So what you've got really is a translation that has been put together by people who are not working from the original translation at all. They're working, if anything, from written grammars, early written grammars. We've got so many grammars today. They would have had much fewer to work from. They would have been working from Strong's dictionary and things like that. So they're really not. And even today, I would say that there is a risk, even amongst scholars. There are scholars who know enough Greek to study the Bible, but not enough to actually read it. And I actually think that's bad for scholarship, because there should be an organicness to our understanding of this language that means that we're not as dependent on those books. And so when we are really dependent on those books, there's a degree of sort of fighting in the dark to kind of work out, well, which one of these solutions is the best. But a more organic understanding of the scriptures, the ability to read the Greek, actually gives you start to see patterns. You start to see the way words are used. That gives you more understanding of the flexibility of words and the differences between English and Greek, which is significant. So, here's men who are by no means qualified whatsoever, picking their way through, coming from a very slanted theological perspective and trying to put something out there that's going to support that theological view, rather than actually trying to be faithful to the original text that's been handed down to us for thousands of years prior to them coming along. And, for me, even if we've got a fear of God, we should fear to do that sort of thing. I mean, the book of Revelation warns us about adding to the scriptures. And I don't think the idea there is, you know, to not to extrapolate things from the scriptures, but to really say, well, let's make the scriptures mean something that it doesn't mean. And that's effectively what they've done here. So, yeah, so I haven't got an in-depth knowledge of the history of it, but there's a few little nuggets that I've slipped away there and that might be useful.
No, that was very helpful. And I know I think we would both agree on this, because I did mention this earlier, and that is, if we stepped away from John 1:1 and looked at other places where there would be the most egregious examples, I think probably the best examples would be the interjection of words like all other things in the book of Colossians, saying that Christ has created all things. And I remember when I was preaching through Colossians, and I had posted a picture of my notes from Colossians, and maybe I should take a second here and look this up, because I wanted to ask you this particular question from Colossians 2. So give me 1 second here to pull this up. Actually, maybe Colossians 1, because I think it's from beginning at verse 15. He is the image of this is the English Standard Version. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. I posted a picture of my notes because I had done something creative with the original language and had just made this really pretty graphic. I'm a graphic guy, so I make pretty notes, right? Like, so sometimes I'll take pictures of them. Pretty is probably not the best word. Very, very unmanly. So let me get I make handsome notes. But I posted something, and the guy, somebody from Twitter, went on a rant against what I had put, and he basically insinuating that pos here did not, in fact, encompass everything. That when it says, "For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth," and he was arguing that the use of pos there was limited, was not to include all things. I said, but in my argument back then, and you tell me if you think this was bad or good, I said, but yes, but right after that, even though pos can be limited, doesn't always mean all. It can mean all without exception, not all without distinction, right? Like it can have different things. I said, but in this, it goes on to say that he has. All things were created in heaven, on earth, visible, invisible, thrones or dominions or rulers, all things. To say that he didn't create all things, you would have to say that Paul, when writing this, didn't include. What is there other than visible and invisible? What is there other than in heaven and on earth? Is there a third dimension? Is there something we can't? So have you ever heard someone say that pos here is limited, and maybe had that argument?
Yes. Yeah. So your argument though in response is exactly right. What you've got following on from that is a figure of speech. In fact, two figure of speeches. The same figure of speech used twice is probably more accurate. It's called a merism, right? A merism is where you've got two opposite things which are intended to make up the whole, right? So preach the word. In season and out of season. Well, that's all the time, right? That's a merism.
Yep.
Here is the same thing, in the heavens and upon the earth. So all things that are created are either in the heavens or they're on the earth, right? Therein lies the kind of explanation of all things. And then you've got the visible and the invisible. Well, things are either visible, they're created, are either visible or they're not created, or they're not visible. So that's all things again. And then he goes on and he says, well, what about things that might be outside of the authority or the scope of that from a Greco-Roman point of view? And so he goes on, thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, there is nothing. So you can't say then that the emperor is a god and therefore was not created, right? So, because whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authority, all things were created by him and for him. And then of course it repeats at the end of verse 16 again, tapanta diapto. All things were created through him and for him. So it's very, very explicit, that verse. And yeah,
Oh, that and I don't mean to interrupt you, but it was tapanta. That was the one that he was saying.
yeah,
The all. He was saying that putting the definite article in front of panta would make it the all, referring to a specific set, not all. And
no,
that was his
yeah.
argument. Now that you, yeah.
Yeah.
So
No, the use of the
interrupt you
article,
completely.
again, the article doesn't have the same use in English as it does in Greek, right? The article here is just making explicit the plurality of the all things, if anything. So I don't think that argument holds. I think the bigger argument here that I've heard from this passage is that if you go down a little bit into verse 19 and 20, he was through him to reconcile. He was pleased through him to reconcile all things to himself. So the argument is, well, if he's reconciling all things, then that must be the all things that he's talking about back up in verse 16. The problem with that argument, of course, is that there is a problem with that argument. Trust me. Um, I have some notes on this. Hang on a second. The problem with, there it is. Yeah. So the problem with this argument is that these are all the things that require peace, right? So all the things that have been alienated, those are the things that need to be reconciled. Now, so you can't say on the one hand that all creation was created by God and all creation needs to be reconciled in the same way through Christ. That's not the point here. The cross, the making peace by the blood of his cross, there's a specific redemptive purpose in mind here. And I think, again, going back to your original statement, all things can mean different things within this, even within a similar context here. And I would argue that what we've got down in verse 19 and 20 is really specific to that act of reconciliation rather than the act of creation. Now, you can make an argument that all things actually do, in a sense, need to be reconciled to Christ, right? And I think there's a reformed argument to argue for that position. And so even if you do go down that track and saying those two all things are all things, and it's the same in both cases, I don't think that actually undermines the argument that we hold that Christ is still God, that he is the creator. So yeah, and just one last comment on that is, as you mentioned right at the beginning, the word other is just not there. There's no way you can infer it from the context. There are two Greek words for the word other. One means other of the same kind. The other one means other of a different kind. Neither of those words are found in this context anywhere. And so there's just no warrant to import that here into this. And so if you did want to bring that in here, you would say if Christ was created and all other things were created, you would use that word to say all other unlike things that are unlike Christ were also created. But you don't find that here. So there's no argument for it within the context.
Okay, Greek test for me. Is it allos and heteros, or the all other? Is the use of other for other the same and other different? Am I correct?
Heteros is other that is different kind. Allos is other of the same kind. Yeah.
Yeah, nailed it.
Yeah. Good
I don't
word.
always get to talk to. I don't always get to talk to Greek professors. I'm gonna check myself out.
Yeah. No, you're all good. Yeah. And it goes back to things like marriage and stuff, right? Heterosexual. The whole idea is that you marry someone who is other than, is of a different kind to yourself, right? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, brother, I've enjoyed talking to you. Again, I could pick your brain all day. I think this is helpful, though, for people, especially as we're heading into the Christmas season. The question of whether or not Jesus is truly God really it hits us in every area, but specifically when we start thinking about the question of the incarnation. That we begin to think about. And I know we're a couple months away, but in my house, Christmas music starts right around this time of year because
about Halloween, right?
Yeah. Christmas season is already upon us. But every year we celebrate at our church, we celebrate the incarnation. People want to talk about Christmas and people want to debate about celebrating Christmas. I say, but you know what? we should never debate whether or not we should celebrate the incarnation. And we should celebrate that reality all the time, that God became a man, that the second person of the Trinity entered into his own creation, and through that brought with him redemption and a sacrifice to be made for our sins. So that's a tremendous blessing. And there's nothing in the text that should cause us to question whether or not we truly have Christ as the God man.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And for those who do wonder about Christmas, during up to about the 4th century or so, Christmas was universally celebrated. Well, the birth of Christ was universally celebrated around the 6th of January. But there was this celebration on the 25th of December, which was to the sun god. And Christians, because the empire became Christianized, Christians really wanted to overtake that pagan festival. And so they relocated the date of Christmas from the 6th of January to the 25th of December so that they would be celebrating the birth of Christ rather than the worship of the sun god. And so it was really taking a pagan holiday and diminishing the paganness of it and replacing it with something good and holy and right, something that reminds us that God united himself with us so that we could be united with Christ, to paraphrase Athanasius. So it's a really good holiday, I think. And, whatever traditions come with that, Christmas trees or whatever, I think, those things are far less important than reminding ourselves that God became incarnate. He became, it's a Latin term meaning infleshed, so that we could become one with him. So, that's the joy of the Christian faith, really, is that what we have is not because of our righteousness, it's because we're in Christ. And that's really where all his blessing, all his inheritance, all his throne, his rights are all given to us without any deservedness on our part, because of the incarnation. Without the incarnation, none of that would be possible. So it's a good holiday to celebrate.
Amen. Amen. And over in New Zealand, is there any particularly distinct way of celebrating that might be different from us over here in the United States?
So not from a Christian point of view, but one of the most disarming elements of New Zealand Christmases, and I could say this is probably true of Australia as well, is seeing Santa Claus in a bathing suit and with a surfboard under his arm on Christmas, around Christmas. That's kind of what we have, because of course it's summer here, not winter. So we have this twisted kind of form of it all. So it gets weird.
I never thought about that, the fact that it is summer and not winter. Yeah, that's interesting. And okay, so I guess when I think about Santa Claus punching Arius at the Council of Nicaea, which I every year I joke about that and I talk about that. So I can now picture Santa Claus punching Arius in a bathing suit. So
yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I'll have to get AI to work on that.
That's a good idea, actually. We should think of AI for stuff like that, shouldn't we? That's a great use of it.
Santa Claus punching Arius at the Council of Nicaea, wearing a bathing suit, holding a surfboard. That's an AI picture, right?
And don't forget your suntan lotion as well. You gotta protect yourself from the sun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, I want to thank you for coming in, sharing with us about your ministry, giving us a portion of your testimony, and also telling us about the importance of learning the biblical languages. I truly believe it is a very valuable thing for everybody, not just the pastors, but as you said, even for lay folks who are able to invest the time to study. I think it's a useful tool for everybody, and you're making that accessible. So I want to thank you for that, and thank you for all that you're doing.
It's a joy. I'm thrilled to be able to serve. So yeah, it's great. Well,
yeah,
thanks too for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I want to thank you guys all for being a part of the show today. Again, remember, if you want to get a hold of Darryl and look at his ministry, I'm going to have all of his information in the links below. Also, if you want to help this show out, you can do the easiest thing in the world. That's hit the subscribe button. If you like this episode, hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down button twice. Thank you again for listening to Your Calvinist Podcast. My name is Keith Foskey, and I've been your Calvinist. May God bless you.